Welcome to Identified.
I feel like, okay, so I'm both a father and I am a son, right? And there's things about being a son that I want to have a better relationship with my daughter than I do with my parents. Right? And I think that's like every parent's goal.
Right.
But, we repeat the same patterns, we do like whatever. Or you could be the perfect parent and still have a kid who's just not interested in you.
Right.
Like you invest all those years and then they like grow up and then they go away and they,
That's it.
they call you once a year or something. They, whoever they are, don't teach you that,
Right.
You have to just learn that over and over again so we can keep having humans, I guess.
Right. Keep the cycle going. Yeah.
So, it's just like this fingers crossed thing that like my relationship with my daughters will get better as we get older, will like continue, will not be just like this phone call, every once in a while, but there's no guarantees. Just like you have two siblings who love each other and two siblings who hate each other.
Right.
And it's like, you could have great parents and they are their own humans as well.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Nabil Ayers, author, music executive, and host of Identified, the podcast that delves deep into the complex world of family and identity. In this episode, my guest is James Spooner, a graphic novelist, tattoo artist, and filmmaker widely known for the 2003 documentary film Afropunk, and founding the music festival of the same name. He recently published 2 books, The High Desert and Black Punk Now. James and I have a lot in common. We both have a white mother, and as James once put it, a larger-than-life black father. In our conversation, he talks about the punk kids who came from broken homes or single-family households, and the fact that he felt more raised by his punk friends than his actual parents. In our conversation, James also opens up about the 20-some-odd siblings he's discovered, and the different ways in which he's connected with some of them. Stay tuned to hear James's perspective on the importance of trust and security within family relationships, knowing your family will be there for you, even if friends come and go, and how he strives to have that type of strong relationship with his own daughter. Here's my conversation with James.
When I think about my childhood, there were moments where it was like Friday pizza day or whatever, but I don't necessarily equate that to like they didn't happen long enough for it to be this tradition that I would pass down or,
Right.
My family was like, first of all, my dad is just not interested in family. Like we'll get into this, but I have like 20 siblings and I don't know most of them and They don't, we're just not connected like that, And then on my mom's side, she kind of went in and out of like being close to her siblings and my aunts, and I didn't grow up with a strong sense of like community or family and we also moved a ton. I think until my second year of high school, I'd never stayed in the same school for more than 2 years.
Wow. And that was just you and your mom moving, right?
Mostly, yeah. Like my mom and dad were together until I was like 8, I think. I don't even have any memories of him like living in the house because they were always like separated or living in different places because of work. And they did live in the house. I just don't have any memories of it. So he always kind of seemed like of course I know he's my dad, but he also just kind of seemed like a stranger, or like a guy who came in and whatever,
Yeah.
When I do think about family today, I think about like my family, my relationship with my partner, Lisa, my daughter, Hollis, and like the traditions that we have, whether that's like our current tradition is every day we eat dinner, watch a show, and then she like shows us like a slideshow of like kids at her school.
Every day.
Yeah, I mean, she likes to like sneak pictures of kids, and then she'll be like, yeah, this is like, she'd tell us about different people.
Right.
And, it's kind of like a sneaky way that we get to like learn about her life.
Totally.
And then I have another daughter that lives in the Bay Area. And again, it's like, it's been a challenge for me because like I never wanted to have a once a month kind of relationship with one of my kids. But I've done a pretty good job of going up there regularly enough that we're like, all right, we're packing up. We're going to, and it's like, here's the routine, like pick up on Friday, drop off on Sunday, we'll see how that pans out in the long run,
Yeah. So you grew up with, I guess, a very small family unit, mostly you and your mother, but knowing that you have this really big, I want to say extended family, but very close extended family and half siblings, many of them, I assume.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it'd be helpful to just have like a rundown, right? So my dad is from the Caribbean. So he's an immigrant. He moved here in the late 70s to New York City on a sportsman's visa. He was a professional bodybuilder. And my mom is a white woman from the Midwest. She was a school teacher, but she was like moonlighting as a cocktail waitress. So this is late 70s New York. Like there's no money in bodybuilding. So he was also a bouncer. I don't know if he was a bouncer at her club or a club across the street, but they met and fell in love, got married, whatever. Like she knew that he had already been married once and he had 2 kids from that marriage. What she didn't know until like they were divorced was that there were like other kids. Yeah. She knew about 3. So there were 7. She knew about 3. He was a big philanderer and he got a woman pregnant while they were together. And that's where they finally broke up. I didn't know about those 7. Growing up, I knew about 3. And then the one that came from that cheating. So those are the 4 that I grew up with. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s, I started going to St. Lucia. And one time I went and my dad lived there, but he wasn't living there at the time. So I just stayed at his house and all these siblings just like showed up, like not together, but just like, hey, like I'm your older brother. And I'm like, you're like 40 years old, like.
So they heard you were there.
And they're always like,
so they came like deliberately to meet you.
Yeah. Like amazing. I always knew, like I have a photo of you. I always knew you were like, it was like heartbreaking for me because I'm, light skinned. And one of them was like, I always knew I had a white brother in the States, like that kind of stuff. They weren't trying to hurt my feelings. It was just, you know, the way they look at things.
And mostly older then.
Older, but there were also some younger ones.
Okay.
So, at one point I kind of cornered my dad and it was just like, let's go down the list. And he had never done it before, so it was the first time together we were like, how many kids do you have?
Wow.
And we got to 20 and then he was like, and there's probably some others, but I don't claim them.
I don't know if you remember this. I'm sure it came up in one of our talks, but when I finally met my father as an adult and asked him, he told me about the kids that I knew about and that he knew about. And then I said, are there others like me? Mm-hmm. And he went,
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that is something that I definitely related to with your book. And that's kind of the foundation of a lot of my childhood. Even if I don't know about these people, my siblings, like there's that energy of like lying, living. He was married a ton of times. Sometimes I remember he was married to this one woman for like 10 years and I never tried to learn her name because I was like, this isn't going to last. It's like, This is, what are you, number 6? Like, and it was like, oh, that one actually lasted 10 years. But, I grew up with him like taking me to other women's houses and like, this is my friend, but I knew something was up and I'm like a little kid, but, like this person makes my mom sad, like whatever, And it also feels weird because my sibling moved to the States. She's like a year or 2 older than me. And she moved to the States when I was like 8 or 9 and she was like 10, right? Something like that. And we were like, yay, I have a big sister, and we were like tight siblings but then it only lasted like a year because then my parents got divorced and my mom didn't want to take her and he didn't want to take her. So like, she just kind of like ended up with some other family.
Wow, so you had a sibling who's close to you in age who sort of became your sister and then within a year unbecame your sister.
Exactly. So I had this like long history of like, hey, you have a sister or a brother. So, just kind of growing up like, well, what does family mean? Because most people's siblings are like, I have cousins who I'm closer to than some of my siblings.
Right. Probably friends that you're closer to than.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. And then I have siblings that are like, we are connected. We love each other. We don't call one another very often, but when we do, it's like, we're both very excited to hear from one another.
What do you think has made those connections exist versus, of the 20, there's so many.
It just becomes personality at that point, like I remember when I met my brother, he's the oldest of everybody. Basically, my dad was 14 and he was, I mean, you could really only call it molested by like a woman who was in her like late 20s or 30s or something, or early 30s or something. And he got her pregnant. So that was his first kid. I mean, this dude has a crazy story because he grew up in Barbados and people would always be like, you look just like Joe Spooner in St. Lucia. He's this bodybuilder. You look just like him.
Oh, because he's famous.
And because my dad, there's only like 3 famous people from St. Lucia, right? So when he got older, people would tell him like, yeah, he always comes during Christmas. So my brother would just fly to St. Lucia every year, hoping to like run into him. And eventually he did, like in his late 20s or something.
Wow.
And then it was like, oh, like whatever, then I asked my dad about him and he's like, oh yeah, I mean, he's kind of like my brother. He's only 14 years younger than me, I didn't raise him. But when we met, it was like instant chemistry. It's like, there's certain things that we're not like, he's Seventh-day Adventist and I'm not religious at all, but because he's Seventh-day Adventist, he's vegan and I'm vegan.
Right.
So it was like, oh wow, that's the connection, right? He's super artistic, but because he lives in Barbados, he doesn't have like an avenue to funnel his any kind of fine arts, so he's like a craftsman. He can build anything.
Right.
He also like sews. So there was just like an instant chemistry like that we had.
Whether or not you think it's true, were there moments where you felt like, wow, I'm vegan, he's vegan, I'm artistic, he's artistic, we're brothers, like where we sort of...
Yeah, and we like look similar enough, and that's the thing. My dad's genes are super strong. So like we all look like we're siblings.
Right.
So even though like I remember walking in St. Lucia with another one of my older brothers who's like maybe 4 or 5 years older and he's dark skinned and we're just walking down the street and like I heard a girl whisper to her friend like, they look like twins except for he's white.
I love this concept of you being white and Caribbean.
And then my youngest sister, or I guess she's not my youngest, but my second youngest sister, Love, same thing. I met her and we were like instantly just like, I found myself like big brothering her all week, that I was there. There are people who you just connect with, like, and that's just true across the board. When it's like your sibling, these are people who I might not have ever met otherwise because they're like Caribbean, they're like into different things. Right. A lot of them have never been to the States.
Oh, wow.
There's just a lot of stuff that our first foundation is that we have our father and we don't have our father.
Wow. Yeah.
So we all have these stories about like him disappointing us. And that's like, our first.
That's the common family bonding element.
Yeah. And then after that, it's like, okay, so like what else do we have in common, know?
Right.
And sometimes that's it. And the relationship doesn't really blossom. And other times it's like a chemistry that supersedes like the music we listen to or
the basics.
Yeah.
And that's what I've with a much smaller number of newfound siblings and cousins and even people who I'm not related to, but who I consider family. That's really what it comes down to for me is like, are we both into this? We are? Cool. I think we're family. And sometimes it's like, I have a half brother who I met who was great. He was a really nice guy, not into music, into sports, which I'm not like very much like, and we had a great 2-hour lunch, but that was it. And we might never talk again. And I sort of feel bad about it, but it's okay. We just didn't really have that connection. So it's hard to put your finger on what makes it.
Yeah. I can't like allow myself to feel bad. Like I have felt bad, it's just like, okay, I have a cousin who I didn't meet until I was 30 and he's just like a year or two younger than me. He's like from the hood, from Bed-Stuy, like he was born there. He is a correctional officer. He's like, I don't know, just like on the surface, you'd be like, these two people, he's like kind of right wing, we've gotten into it, like, but he's also creative and artistic. And like over the years, when I met him, he just kind of had like a kind of interest in filmmaking, and I would kind of like tell him what I know and try to like usher him through things and watch him get frustrated. And like we'd get into a fight and we wouldn't talk for a long time. But I've watched him like on his own, pick up photography. And I remember the day when he was like, yo, do you want to see my photos? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I want to see your photos, And then I saw him and I was like, dude, like these are really good, It kind of like makes me tear up because on the surface, again, we don't have a lot in common, but there is a chemistry that keeps us connected. And we call each other every once in a while, and we talk politics, and we might agree or disagree. You know, he respects my work. I respect his. In some ways, it's kind of like having a little brother, even though he's like a couple of years younger than me. There's just like an energy that is beautiful.
Yeah.
Same thing. I have an aunt. Like, so this is the thing. It's like, so my dad had a ton of kids. His parents had a lot of kids. So I think it was like 12 kids from 6 different women or something like that, right? So I have uncles and aunts who I've never met, who have already died, you know?
Yeah.
And I have aunts who every time I go to Brooklyn, I call up, and it's like my lesbian aunt and my dance hall queen aunt, you know? And they're both like awesome, so much fun. And I just feel like they love me. Like they're like, oh, my little nephew.
Yeah, it's the reciprocal thing.
But there's also like, they're open-minded, and, you know, I think maybe just by virtue of being like a lesbian or being like a 60-year-old woman with like purple hair or whatever, you know, like, you know, like we're just like connected. And then there's other aunts and uncles who is just like, you know, I'm talking to just respectfully to an older person. And I'm just like, nice to meet you. Yeah. And, you know,
maybe I'll see you again. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there moments or a moment, young or old, when family was redefined for you in any way? Anything that happened? I mean, for me, it was when I realized when I was a kid and lived with my mother, single parent, and with this sort of very diverse community with kids of different races. And then we moved to Salt Lake City. And I was like, oh, this is crazy. Everyone's got 2 parents. Everyone's got a few brothers and sisters. They all live in a normal house. This is like a TV show. I thought the stuff on TV was fake. Actually, this is most of America. And I was the weird one. And it really like sort of flipped my view of what family was. Did you ever have anything like that?
Yeah, it never clicked for me that like other kids had 2 parents at home. I mean, I was aware that like we moved a lot and that was different, you know? I mean, obviously I'm a punk rocker. Like I found that when I was 13. The thing that I found is that like a lot, if not the majority of kids who find punk and hardcore are kids who come from like quote unquote broken homes, you know, single family homes, whatever, right? And, you know, it's hard being a parent. It is exhausting, especially for like angsty teenagers. And I understand now that I have my own angsty teenager, how easy it would be to just like let go, right? Just you go do your thing, you know, especially like my mom had me younger. She was like 23, right? So by the time that I was like an angsty teenager, she wasn't even 40 yet. Like she's 40 years old, New York, like in New York, like she's hanging out with your dad.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
oh, right. Maybe she was, right?
She had a story about him trying to pick her up at Airbnb.
Amazing.
Like, so she's doing the best she can. And I give her props for what she did. But a lot of what she did was move me to New York, where it was just safer than where I lived in the desert.
Yeah.
And I just kind of raised myself, or I was raised by these other punk kids, you know? And that's not to say that I was like living with them, or like I always had a safe home to be, you know, there was always food in the fridge, like that kind of stuff. But just in terms of like my ethics, my morals, my like day to day, like this is what we do. This is how we're moving
really
through
important
life.
Stuff. Yeah.
This is how you exist in the world. Like, we're not a family as punks that like go on vacations or like, you know, like you want to travel, like you better be on tour with somebody. Like, you know,
So, a different city every day. Yeah.
Yeah. So like a lot of my foundation came from that. And most of my friends were people who were in the same situation. We're like 15-year-olds with no curfew. Like, yeah, that's
in New York.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. Pre-Giuliani. So we're like hanging out at bars. Yeah. It was just like varied levels of like, some people's situation was way worse than mine. Mine wasn't even bad. It was just like not a suburban 2-family, you know, 2-parent.
And you were free to kind of, I guess, create your own structure or sort of do what you wanted.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. Which like, you know, it's like as an adult, I'm like, oh yeah, that wasn't a, you know, like I missed out on a lot of things, you know. My partner talks about like how when she was in college, she would always go whitewater river rafting, or like they'd go on these trips or whatever. And I was like, yo, I was grinding, like I was like 20 years old in New York City with like, I wasn't in college. My friends weren't in college. We were like trying to make $500 a week so that we could like live.
Yeah.
Party promoting or doing whatever we had to do to just like pay the rent. There's no time for like trips.
Do that later. You do it now.
Yeah.
What is family to you?
Now that I have kids and I have a stable relationship, I understand like the value of family, which ultimately is like trust, respect, and knowing that like they'll be there for you, right? Like I try to tell my daughter this when she's like, being angsty or whatever. It's just like, look, I know you're 13. I know your friends are way more important to you than me, but like when your friends like drop you, or you guys get into some argument over whatever, or you are at your lowest, like I'm always going to be here. I'm always going to love you. Like while I have that option with my mom, like I definitely don't have that option with my dad,
right?
And it's like, I haven't talked to him in like 12 years, and there are friends that I have that with. There are a couple people who I feel like I will just always know. But there is something about like being like related to somebody that there's like an extra layer of security. Certain cousins who like I don't talk to for years and years and years. And then I have a cousin on my white side in Texas who is like very progressive and left leaning. And like during like Trump and all of that stuff, like I was like the only person he could talk to, because like the rest of the family is like Christian.
Yeah.
It's like he had to leave the church, like all this stuff, because it's just like, well, you guys aren't actually following Christ, and it's like I can't talk to him about that stuff,
right? But
I can talk to him about the politics that he is seeing as being right for people,
So the trust and the security you talk about, just in general, you don't feel that with your father then?
No, not even remotely. And even when I was like a kid, I always had the expectation of him like flaking out. I really gave him 1,000,001 opportunities, like all the way up until like my early 30s. I was just like, yo, you could turn this around today.
Right.
I'm here. I don't think it's important to him. It's not of interest to him. Like all these kids are just like byproducts of having sex.
Yeah. You got me. That's kind of what I feel like too. Yeah.
It's not a good feeling, but you have to, at least at a certain point, recognize that it's not personal.
Right. Totally. Which is such a crazy thing, right? Because what's more personal than a father having a son?
Yeah. I mean, you'd want to believe, like, I know what my relationship with my kid is. And I'm like, dude, you are missing out, But you can't make people are who they are. But at the same time, it's interesting because, like, I could talk to you for 40 podcasts about these feelings and things around my dad, right? With my mom, it's just kind of like, yeah, she's cool. She's there. Like, I love her. I feel like, okay, so I'm both a father and I am a son, right? And there's things about being a son that I want to have a better relationship with my daughter than I do with my parents.
Right.
Right. And I think that's like every parent's goal.
Right.
But, we repeat the same patterns. We do like whatever. Or you could be the perfect parent and still have a kid who's just not interested in you.
Right.
Like you invest all those years and then they like grow up and then they go away and they,
That's it.
They call you once a year or something. Whoever they are, don't teach you that,
Right.
You have to just learn that over and over again so we can keep having humans, I guess.
Right. Keep the cycle going. Yeah.
So, it's just like this fingers crossed thing that like my relationship with my daughters will get better as we get older, will like continue, will not be just like this phone call, every once in a while, but there's no guarantees. Just like you have two siblings who love each other and two siblings who hate each other. Right. And it's like, you could have great parents and they are their own humans as well.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. Please consider subscribing to Identified wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And be sure to check out Identified on YouTube and identifiedpod.com, where you can watch videos from our interviews. Our executive producer is Kieron Banerji, and the show is produced by Palm Tree Island. The music for Identified is by Noella and Patricia Brennan. I'm Nabil Ayers. Thanks for tuning in.